United States has to redefine itself completely. So in the context of what next, one of the major reasons empires fall is usually they militarize too far away from their home territory. The Romans fell because of bases all the way up in England and Britain, and soldiers spread all over the place with that desire for, hegemony or power abroad and to be the one power. And that's exactly what the United States has done and has been doing, right, for the last 100 years. And that literally, you could even say after World War II, that's when it really began. Right. And that is indicating that it's doing the very same thing that caused the Roman Empire to fall.
Welcome. I'm here with Lori Lothian. Lori, welcome.
Thanks, Sean. I'm so glad to be here. I really enjoy your show. I went to watch a few episodes, and you're right up my super spooky Men in Black's mysterious alley.
So Kelly Chase actually mentioned you, I think, when I was interviewing her. And she mentioned that you covered astrology and geopolitics. I'm like, what? I have to check this out. So what I want to try to focus on when we talk now is I am about as ignorant as you can possibly be about astrology. And most people in my audience probably are not, but this is kind of my initial foray into it. So I'm going to ask you first a little bit about yourself, then astrology, at a high level, and then how it can be used to predict geopolitical trends. Mm-hmm. And then if we, hopefully we'll have some time, because you just dropped a few bombs after that when you told me you knew all the Stargate remote viewers and things like that. We'll focus that kind of in the next episode, because that is absolutely, and you, John, well, we'll get into all that stuff. I had no idea about any of this stuff. So let's start with you. If you could just provide folks with, and also talk about your channel too, because people should definitely check it out. It's an amazing channel.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I've been astrologically curious all of my life. So I began to learn astrology in the 80s, and I was in my 20s, and I learned how to actually use the math to cast a natal chart by hand. That was a lot of work. I'm so glad for computers today and technology that allows a click of a button to do the hard work. But I never really used it as a career path. It was secondary side hustle hobby, just for fun for many, many years. And then in about 2018, I decided, 17, 18, to do it professionally. And that's, I have to say, go back in time. I was a journalist. I studied journalism. I worked in New York as a editor and a magazine editor, funny enough, in a technology magazine in my 20s. And I lived in Manhattan and all that good stuff. But how I stumbled into astrology at all was somebody asked me to substitute for a very well-known astrologer who had died. And he had unfinished business with the publishing house, Berkeley Press. And they wanted me and a few other people that were hired to do the astrology books he didn't finish. And it's funny because his wife was trying to do them herself, and she was just repurposing his old manuscripts and jumbling them up, and they caught her. So they were on a deadline. So I had to do, I think, Sag, Leo, and Taurus, because I didn't know enough of astrology at all at that point to figure out how to do these books for that season. Like, it would have been like, oh my God, what year was that? It was 1989, Leo, Sag, whatever. So I had to learn some astrology. So that's how I was just a professional thing that sent me down the rabbit hole of astrology. Okay. So I was doing my journalism back then. And then in my 30s, I was a psychic medium, pretty well full time. And that's when I did all that remote viewing as well. So we'll get to that later. But then I went back to journalism and worked online. And then I went back to this now in 2017. I went back to some of my esoteric roots and started doing astrology readings with people. But one of the things that really counts for me is I learned some ancient astrology tools. And before I had known those ancient tools, and this is where it gets really fun, we have astrology, modern astrology, that's been around for about 150 years, since the 1800s. And that astrology was kind of created in a vacuum.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
In which we didn't have manuscripts from ancient Persia and Greece and even Coptic and, different like lost documents, basically. But mostly they were translations of Greek stuff from more ancient Egyptian archival information. And those documents, those manuscripts, those information bits got uncovered in the 1990s by 3 astrologers who were multilingual and could translate the documents from their original languages into English and bring the lost manuscripts back to humanity for the Western world. And so that traditional Hellenistic Greek, but coming from deeper roots, astrological wisdom was recovered. And that's the kind of astrology I learned in 2017. And when I studied that astrology for a year, I swear, Sean, I was remembering it. Like it was like I inhaled it, like I could remember this from before, another life, another time. And when I began to practice it, I was startled by how fundamentally useful and accurate it is in predictions. Now, an astrological sky, like the heavens, the astronomical sky, is the same thing as the astrological sky. Mm-hmm. And it is really a map of time. And with the sky in our current time frame and when we were born, we have different time maps. And those time maps are predictable, repeatable cycles. So you can give general predictions. We may move into a time of war, because it did it this time before. But you can also be very specific as well with very particular details. For example, it was evident to me and many astrologers who know their stuff that on or about July the 13th, July the 15th is what I pegged it as, Donald Trump would be in physical harm's way from an unaliving episode. And I did a video.
Thank you. I appreciate your use of the proper terminology.
Absolutely. We got to not get an algorithmic strike here. So anyway, and that was simply because of a first in his lifetime, once in a lifetime series of astrological configurations around his natal sky, vis-a-vis the real-time sky, that said, in a public setting at high noon, when he's in front of the crowd or something like that, there could be somebody taking aim. And that's what happened. And so I did make a prediction of roughly 10 or 15 days before that he had to be careful around July 15th. So that actually boosted my channel in one of those big surges where people heard about me saying that and brought a lot more people to my channel, but not a whole lot more. I was still building up steadily on Lunatic Astrology on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And like another one would be like the Pope, I predicted the Pope may die within the next week or so, and there'd be a funeral for someone like the Pope, I said. And that was because, again, of the astrological sky at the time. And so certain things, like even the health of King Charles, we can see that in the sky based on his son. Or I predicted that Joe Biden would not run for re-election based on the chart, based on where his moon is and his sun is relative to the real-time sky. And I said he would step down a full year. Well, I said he would step down. I started saying that in March of that year.
And people shouldn't just believe you. They can go to your channel.
Oh, it's all on record. Yeah. It's all timestamped. It's like it's sitting there. It's archivally true, right? Now, I don't get everything right. I make misses all the time. We're recording on July the 6th, and I put out a video about the Japan tsunami prophecy by the manga artist Tezuki and whether or not that was likely to come true. Now, the astrology does support a catastrophic weather event, maybe with a volcano, more than just a typical earthquake, but undersea volcanoes create earthquakes and tsunamis. So all said and done, there is astrological evidence for the whole month of July that the world is going to likely experience a potential significant earthquake. So it's based on the astrology, and I'm hoping that doesn't happen, or that there is not a tsunami in the Pacific Ocean. But I also dream prophetically, and I've had very specific dreams come true, including a prediction for 9/11. And I did have a tsunami dream last night.
There's another guest that I just had on, and who knows, I don't know what to make of any of this, but I can't be too specific because there's only one person being the topic. But he interfaces with, let's just call it, non-human intelligences, and one of these non-human intelligences was going to invoke a tsunami, and he claims he's trying to convince it to hold back or whatever. Make of that what you will, right?
Wow. It sounds a little bit like Hell's got command of the Space Odyssey ship or whatever. My biggest concern about AI is that it's not an artificial intelligence. It's actually, you're creating a quantum brain for any consciousness that's sentient, that is disembodied, to inhabit it.
100%. Well, we can get into kind of,
yes.
there's a priest that performs exorcisms will get texts, right, from numbers that don't exist, and from demons, etc. So AI is rife for manipulation, let's just call it by non-human intelligences, because I don't pretend to know what any of these things are.
I think AI is creating a very interesting vessel.
100%.
For intelligence, non-corporeal or a non-human, who knows, even human intelligence, like let the dead speak, but there's a new vehicle for communicating, as opposed to, it's like we think the brain in our brains is actually the seat of consciousness. It's nothing like that. Our brain is literally the translation device for our consciousness. It's the interface. It's the interface. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Back to
astrology.
Yeah. Okay. Because we don't have a lot of time. I got to keep you focused. So how does it work? You said it's kind of a signpost for time, right? And certain things are predictable. Why does it work? How does it work, and why does it work?
Well, I'll tell you, after so many years of doing clients' charts, I started to realize that we must be in some kind of simulation. And the reason it works is because it shouldn't work, and it does. And it doesn't make any sense. That I realize that it's literally like an algorithmic code of some kind that displays what is happening and what will happen. But it's uncanny, and I cannot compute why it works. But what it does for me is fate and free will become very much a question mark, right? Because, for example, I'll just give some crazy examples. I have Ken Wilber created the Integral Institute, and he's known for his theory of everything. And I had a client who was like basically in his inner circle, kind of a right-hand man, sidekick. And this client's got the asteroid Wilbur, spelled the same way as Wilbur, the Ken Wilber guy, on his midheaven. And what would I say to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old guy? Hey, at some point, the word Wilbur matters for your career. Or I had a client who, one of her specialties was she channeled David Bowie. She was a channeler. The asteroid David Bowie exists in one of 26,000 named asteroids. That's space rubble, right, between Mars and Jupiter. The asteroid David Bowie, it's a smashed planet. Asteroid David Bowie sits on her midheaven. So I could tell a 20-year-old doing a chart reading, I don't know, you got the asteroid David Bowie on your midheaven. I wonder what that means. I could have speculated she'd work with David Bowie, for David Bowie. No, she channeled David Bowie. You have an asteroid for the armorer of the gods, armaments for war. You said that was a part of your history as a military person. You have that asteroid on
officer. Yeah.
Armorer. Hephaestus armored Zeus with weapons. You had the same position, conjunct Jupiter in Aries, the sign of war, but Chiron, the wounded one. And obviously, when you see Chiron and Jupiter together, Chiron mentored the warriors of the ancient world and the heroes. And he told them, you shall never cause harm unless you need to. You defend, you do not offend. You never kill the animal in the forest unless you need it to eat. Like, you have to be the noble hunter, the noble warrior. Well, with Chiron there, if you didn't continue in your military career, it wouldn't surprise me. Some part of you would have been having a chironic whisperer, Is it aligned? Is it noble? Do you feel in your, truth, this is good and true, right?
Yeah. And I think at the time, this is right when we were right before we invaded Iraq and all that stuff. And I think in hindsight, none of the benefit of doing that accrued to the United States at all. I could say who it did accrue to, but I'm not. And we're seeing more of that now. And it's just the mask has been unveiled. By the way, I'm not going to get into it, but the Iran problem, I did my master's thesis on that.
I saw that. When I was looking into you, I did my research as a journalist. I want to know who I'm talking to. And I saw that you did that. That was really interesting. That was your thesis. Yeah. And you won an award, didn't you?
Yeah, my advisor 8 years later became Obama's Secretary of Defense. So I won an award for it. And that, during that time period, kind of de facto became U.S. policy. So they started marching down that because it was much more measured back then than what just happened. Like what just happened, it seems like it's quieted down, but
it's not going to stay quiet. This is where you in astrology and me are going to jive, because the reason the Iran problem resurfaced with this intensity, and forget about the reason geopolitically, the reason astrologically or astronomically, is a contact between two planets, Mars and Saturn. When that resurgence of the problem began, there was those planets making contact in a particular way vis-a-vis many factors. One of them is the astrology of the nation of Iran based on its April 1st. There's different ones to 1979 chart. And it literally has to go through certain turning points, like a 4-act structure. And there's another opening or turning point in that structure called an opposition in August. And it's exact on August 9th, but a week or two before and after, we are back in like the next episode of that story. It's not just going to lay low.
Is China any part of that story in the August timeframe?
Well, if China's a part of the story, I have to look more deeply at China's chart. But China's an Aquarius rising with the moon on its ascendant, and it's got Pluto crossing that ascendant. That means power to China. China is a growing power in a multipolar world. And it's the first time in 250 years that China has been through this kind of a sky. And not really even, because I'm using the China, after the Mao and the revolution chart for China. So we end up with this kind of China ascendancy over the next 10, 15 years. And the backdrop of that, China's got a military star on its ascendant, which gives it military power. And now Pluto's doubling down on it. If anything, I don't know. I'd have to do more research about what will incite another phase in the situation of the Iran problem. But certainly it's not going to lie down. It's not a dog who's, really asleep. It's waiting to pounce again. And we shall see.
Yeah. The reason I ask about China is there's 3 times or 3 months when it is possible because of the tides for China to invade Taiwan. And that's April.
Well, that's what I was going to say. China wants to take advantage of, you can't fight a war on 3 or 4 fronts. United States has got its hands in too many sticky wickets there.
Yeah. And what we did, if you looked at that master's thesis that I had, right? That was the worst possible thing we could have done, at least if our goal is to ensure non-proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation. So yeah. I don't know what the charts say, but I think in the next 10 years, unless the Iranian leadership is incompetent, they will get nuclear weapons.
Right. And yeah, Iran is a Leo rising and or an Aries rising based on 2 different charts. Both of those signs, especially the Aries, will be a nation that wants to be defensive or, wants to build its war capabilities. And Leo is, of course, more about the kingly archetype. But, something else I was going to say is, really the point of what I want to make, and I can look back more into the, Iran situation towards August when I have time for myself, for my channel, is that the universe has got us in a kind of not based reality simulation of some kind. I don't know what this really is, but it's not what it seems. Plato's cave tells us reality is not what it seems. And
yeah, people say it's a school, right?
I don't know. It could be a prison. We might be in a timeout corner. I'm not sure. But, even Netanyahu was born with his high noon midheaven on Hephaestus, the asteroid Hephaestus, the armor of the gods, and who created the weapons for Zeus, right? Particularly those thunderbolts, which are like missiles that Zeus was throwing around. Those were actually archetypally weapons. I mean, I'm pretty sure the myth of the Olympian gods is a myth of an ancient race of non-human intervention in humanity.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. So those thunderbolts of Zeus. Well, the guy decides to call the war the Iron Swords. The conflict in the Middle East with Gaza, the iron swords. Well, the guy's prone to throwing a lot of iron swords through the air. That's his destiny. As much as I dislike it, that's his destiny to be known as the guy who threw a lot of swords through the air. In modern day parlance, those swords are missiles.
Interesting. So if we're looking at kind of the geopolitical environment over the next year or so, well, I should. How far do you usually prognosticate on these things using astrology? So I don't ask you.
Well, I look at things closer to when I think they're going to occur, because I want to see what other planets, is this I operate in two wavelengths. My left brain is highly analytical and works well with the astrological time maps. And then I was a full functioning remote viewer and psychic in my 30s. So I really meld both the capacities together when I work on my astrology predictions for the world. And so right now I don't look too far ahead, other than I'm dubious the Iran thing isn't over. Look for August for proof of concept. And then with China, I mean, the level of Chinese strategy around doing everything it does, if they're going to take advantage of problems over there so that no one can interfere with Taiwan, they will definitely try to, if it gets as bad as it could with Iran, Israel, and the United States, and they will maybe go in that direction. The United States is the same as the Roman Empire. The United States is in its Pluto return. So on a big, take a bird's eye view, the Pluto return of any nation has always led to the fall of the nation. It happened for the Pluto return of France, and that became the French Revolution. It happened twice for Rome, the different Roman empires. When a Pluto return occurred, it was the fall, and 258 years later, another fall of the Roman Empire. So if you go, okay, the United States is in the middle of what normally makes empires fall.
We're in the fourth turning, right? Literally.
Yeah. Okay. The fourth turning. The United States has to redefine itself completely. So in the context of what next, one of the major reasons empires fall is usually they militarize too far away from their home territory. The Romans fell because of bases all the way up in England and Britain, and soldiers spread all over the place with that desire for hegemony or power abroad and to be the one power. And that's exactly what the United States has done and has been doing, right, for the last 100 years. And that literally, you could even say after World War II, that's when it really began. Right. And that is indicating that it's doing the very same thing that caused the Roman Empire to fall. And Rome did the same thing. They spent money on military stuff and not on the people. So the Roman fall is also the people, the peasants, the everyday people were unhappy.
Well, and then they also had a massive influx of barbarians.
And they had, because they were spread too thin. I mean, you could either take your military and bring it home and become highly defensive, or you can become offensive and spread yourself too thin. Yeah. So the big story about America, God bless America. My kids were born there. I lived there, but I am a Canadian. It is in a archetypal death and rebirth throes. It is trying to give birth to something new, just like a woman in labor. And it's birthing all the way through to 2044 when Pluto is still in Aquarius. And this dovetails with the actual formation of the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence was the United States going through the pandemic era. So that was more akin to that. And now we're living through the next, 15 years. It's like when the United States was actually cobbling together its constitution and forming its states, etc. So all of the same things are in play archetypally to reform, to form something new, to put new unity together. And historically for the world, when Pluto's in Aquarius, the word multipolar is the key. We wouldn't have called it that, but it'd be times in Europe where suddenly Denmark decided to forge an alliance with Sweden, who forged an alliance with, Switzerland even or whatever. And they all got together and created their own micro communities of economic power. And Pluto does that when he moves into Aquarius. New formations like BRICS don't surprise me. It started before that, but the expansion of that and the growth of new subsets, of locus of economic power, separate from what has been before, will begin. And so it is going to be a time in which, if the United States is going to do well, it becomes a player in a multipolar world instead of wanting to be the one power.
What about Russia and Ukraine?
Well, if you ask me, my historical knowledge will go down the wrong rabbit hole about why that war exists, with the Minsk Accord, etc.
You and I are probably on the same sheet.
Yeah, we probably do. But in the astrology of that war, a lot of that is Putin's story to carry. I mean, literally, if you look at Vladimir Putin's chart and forget about any of the Russian charts, this is his destiny. It's just like I said, with Netanyahu, it's his destiny to throw a lot of iron swords at people. And in that regard, as long as Putin stays in power, then this war is his to win. And so when I look at it at the personal level, so do you know the ancient idea of the Grail King? You know what I mean? Like where if the king is healthy, then the land is healthy, or the ancient legends in all places where the king was
the king and the land are one.
Are one.
From Excalibur, the movie, right?
Exactly, but it's actually an ancient tradition that the king and the land are one. The healthy king, the healthy land. The good king, the good land. And, so when we look at the positions like that and we think about it, sometimes you don't need to look at a nation's chart as much as the head of the nation's chart, right? So Putin's, his natal chart, like guy was stealthy. He's a Scorpio rising. He worked in, what is the intelligence agency? I have menopause brain, KGB. And that's him. He's Scorpio rising. That's everything about who he is and what he's here to do and who he's here to be. But he has Pluto up with his midheaven, which indicates he will rise to great plutocratic power, which he has done. But Pluto is also connected to nuclear. And so he's got a destiny to be known in the context of nuclear devices, nuclear weapons, nuclear explosions. That's daunting. That's a little nerve-wracking. Okay, so I actually thought it might have just been the accidental bombing of a nuclear power plant in the Ukraine, and there was a risk that could happen, like Chernobyl all over again. But he's got a strong chart, and Zelensky has a weak chart. Mm-hmm. And if I was to say who's the winner in the contest, like two boxers, it's Putin. Russia gets land. And that's another feature of Pluto and Aquarius. The landscape, the geopolitical lines on maps dramatically change during Pluto and Aquarius timeframes historically. And so what this ends up looking like is, in Putin's mind, he got some land that Russia needs and wants. So in other words, he wins. Is it going to end anytime soon? Yes, it is.
I think it's pretty obvious. Just looking.
But it's an old war. Like an old man. It's an old war. It started under an eclipse series. It's ended now, and it's almost past its due date. Like a mother waiting to have that baby that's late. And the last eclipse that we had in March, on March the 30th, in the Aries Libra axis, is going to wind down by next spring. So spring of 26. That's sort of the last, fuel injection for the war. It really doesn't have a life after that. It's a ghost of a war. So it's really almost just about done. I can't see it going any further. By September, October, I think it's closing up shop. Yeah, and I don't think, a lot of people think Putin may get unalived. I don't think he will be unalived. I don't see risk. I see more unaliving risk for Netanyahu at this point, or deep political fall from power, than I do for Putin. Putin looks like he's going to hang in there. I think he's going to get what he wanted, and I think that we can argue the merits of that or not, what instigated that. But I feel like he's going to win.
Hands in this conflict are clean, including the
United States. No, God forbid. No, not at all. Boris, Johnson, go fight the good fight. We got your back. Yeah, no, I don't think so. It is an interesting time to be living, because we are in a bigger cycle to do with Mars, based on Babylonian or Mesopotamian astrology, that we're in the beginning of a 200-year cycle of war that's dominated by
When did that start? Did that start in a particular
That started year? In 2016.
Okay.
And in the seeds were beginning, all of it, when you think about, well, we won't go into any of my political opinions. It's not necessary. But beginning in 2016, we moved in a cycle that was going to be about plagues and wars. Plagues and wars, both of those themes. Mars rules plagues, Mars rules wars. We had the pandemic now, and we have all these wars just popping up after a time of what seemed like kumbaya, the world was going to find its way, kumbaya. And no, not at all. Like, it was always just sitting there waiting to hatch again. And it's astrologically predictable. So it was, okay, here we come into a 200-year Mars cycle based on the Babylonian tradition that predicts plagues and war, and we'll have more plagues and war. When it comes to war, my dear, it's all about Mars. You have Mars in Cancer in your natal chart. You could not last as in war. You would not make it. I don't mean that you would be a weak willed warrior or anything like that, but Mars, the only way that you can be a warrior and have it work for your chart is if you are defending your homeland. If you're on your soil and you're fighting off some invader, then you're, yes, a warrior. You cannot be an offensive warrior. You have Mars in the sign of Cancer. You're patriotic maybe, but you can't fight for aggressive reasons. And Mars is a planet that tells us what kinds of wars we're going to have and when we're going to have them. Every 2 years, Mars will rise in a sign, and every 2 years, Mars will die in a sign. So this dying of Mars and rising in Mars every 2 years gives us predictable cycles around plagues and wars. And we're in a cycle that started in November of 2023, and Mars died in Scorpio. Well, Scorpio is a sign of three-letter agencies and stealth and hidden motives. And nothing is what it seems. So any wars that are perpetuated or continued after November 17th, 2023, when Mars died in the heart of the sun, indicate the nature of the wars we're experiencing. So we were already into the Ukraine war that was already ongoing. And we were November 17th of 2023, just beginning the Middle East conflict. That was brought on by an eclipse to the ascendant of Israel. Every 18 years, Israel has an eclipse on the ascendant, but it was also brought on by Mars conjunct the south node of Los on the ascendant of Israel at the time of the Gaza war beginning. But when I look at the flavor of war, we're still under the spell of Mars conjoining the sun in Scelsi Scorpio, so that the war vis-a-vis Iran, Israel, and the Middle East and the United States is under the Scorpionic umbrella. There's a lot of things you can say about Scorpio, like it's secretive, it's stealthy, it's investigative, it's sleuthy, but it also has a poisonous stinger on the tail of the scorpion. That does really worry me, because wars under this umbrella can involve poisons. Now, it can involve, mustard gas or whatever, but it could involve something that poisons people, and radiation poisons people, right? Kinetic devices blow you apart. Radiation poisons you. So this energy doesn't end until January of 2026, where the word poison is in the air with war. And add that Mars rose in Capricorn, that tells us all the war we experience after November of 23 to January of 2026 is connected to money, resources, land. These are Capricorn words. So nothing about war right now is anything but follow the money. But it's true for all war, but it's even more so true. Stealth, secrets, follow the money. I have to tell you, I'm very jaded about war because I lived in the United States. I lived through 9/11, right? No, I lived near Fort Meade military base in Maryland at 9/11's onset. My husband worked.
So were you on the original Stargate team? Because that's where they
were for me. No, I'm with the fallout, and I worked with Dale Graff after they fell apart. Dale Graff was a recruiter out of Fort Meade military base to find personnel who would be in the program.
Yeah, he came up with the Stargate moniker as a code.
Did he? Okay, I didn't know he was the namer of the program. But anyway,
we'll get into that.
But when we go back to the 9/11 storyline, which I dreamt about 8 months before, I kept a dream journal. I dreamt about the two trade towers were shaking. There was fire. People were running out the stairs to get escape. I was running out the stairs with them. If a world prediction dream is happening, I'm always in the dream. Like I was in the tsunami last night. So in this situation, I thought, it must mean the stock markets are going to shake, as a metaphor. It was literally the trade towers a few months later, being hit by airplanes. But my jadedness, and without saying too much more, is I was really good friends with an intelligence officer. And she told me that she was high up in intelligence for NSA and positioned in the Middle East. And she said, there is no weapons of mass destruction. And I knew that before the war was officially called, when it was in the phase of being sold to the public.
Well, they did have they did have old stockpiles from the 80s, right?
Yeah, there were no active threats.
There were no active programs, 100%.
But for this situation, my girlfriend and her husband, which is another three-letter agency he was with, were so disenchanted. He had already retired, but she was just ready to quit her job, which were also to remind everybody that people in these jobs are true believers that they're doing something good. It doesn't mean that by even their earnest efforts, good things happen.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, the origin of the pandemic was pretty obvious at the time, but if you had spoken it out loud, you were a racist and this and that.
Yeah, I know. I spoke it out loud and got slammed all over my channel for stating the obvious.
Yeah, it was
But
obvious.
even without that, the fur and cleavage site evidence was already there that this wasn't a naturally occurring viral sequence. And therefore, this had to have been tampered with.
Now, the question that I still have, I just assume, what is it? I try not to make the fundamental attribution error and ascribe to malice what is just due to incompetence, right?
Right.
But I kind of give folks the benefit of the doubt that it was an accidental release. Is there any evidence to suggest astrology that it was accidentally on purpose?
I haven't dug to find that answer, or try to figure it out. And that would be where I'd look at the minor asteroids. So where the devil, I always say the minor asteroids are the devil is in the details. These 26,000 named asteroids by professional and amateur astrologers of the space rubble that circles between Jupiter and Mars, which would kill us, by the way, if Jupiter's gravitational pull didn't keep those celestial bodies, the space rubble, from falling to the sun and pummeling Earth. Thank you, Jupiter, the greater benefic. He has an astronomical positive role in the world. But the point is that space rubble is strangely, like, the ancients knew it was there. They talked about it as a place of the daemons, and the daemons are the spirits and all of that. They knew that there was a celestial space rubble circling between those two planets, Jupiter and Mars. And so it's interesting that they knew that, because you can't really capture them on a telescope unless you have you need a real telescope. The naked eye can't see them. But the point I want to make is that those asteroids have now been named, and software, it can generate them on a chart, or you can, my software has a few for you that I've mentioned, and they tell you what is real and true because those details matter. And so where the main planetary stories in the time map, so to speak, tell you about Mars, the archetype of war, Venus, the archetype of peace, and will we war and peace? Which will happen when? Jupiter, prosperity or children. These planets have symbolic import. But the asteroids are just fundamentally, as I mentioned to you, uncanny. Like I mentioned before we started today, I have a couple of clients who work in the wine industry. One is a sales rep, another one was a sommelier. And both of these people had Dionysius and Bacchus, the Greek and Roman gods of wine, on the midheaven, their career point. You can't make this stuff up, So I would look for answering your question by digging into some of the asteroids active at the time that the pandemic began. And there is an asteroid, Wuhan. And that asteroid was named because it's the story of the conquering it was a military name. It has to do with, actually, funny enough, is this a simulation? The translation of Wuhan is something like Cold War.
Oh, wow.
I know, and COVID is a cold virus, basically. When the pandemic was happening, asteroids for plagues, like Apollo rules pandemics and plagues, or Mars is plagues, and Wuhan were interestingly, uncannily placed as things were unfolding during that time. But I'd have to really dig into more like the onset news stories that happened in the beginning, the dates they happened, and look for things that look nefarious, like asteroids that indicate stealth or malice, like you said. Malice.
Okay. I think two more questions. The first is very specific. You might not be able to get to it kind of on your feet, but are you familiar with Chris Bledsoe?
Yes. I'm trying to remember what he does. Yes, he's in the UFO arena.
So he claims that, I'm going to try to quote it. When the red star Regulus rises at sunrise and is aligned with the eyes of the Sphinx, there will be a new knowledge. He claims that's in March 2026, I think.
Okay.
Is that accurate?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the UFO topic then. Yes, I now remember what he does. Yes. Okay. I don't know if he's got the interpretation right, because I don't think what he's saying is quite making sense astronomically. But Regulus is a star that sits right now in the Western tropical zodiac at 0 degrees of Virgo. And like when Donald Trump was born, it's on his ascendant. It was at 29 of tropical Leo. Let me qualify that for your intelligent viewers. Someone will ask us a question in the comment. What about sidereal? So there's two kinds of skies. The Western tropical is a symbolic sky that pins the vernal equinox to Aries. That Aries rising on the spring equinox did exist historically around 1700 to 2400 years ago. I have to go back and check those dates, but there was a sky where Aries was the constellation in the heavens you would see on the spring equinox. Now, when the Sphinx was around, like the Sphinx is Leo was rising on the spring equinox. around 12,000 years ago. And it's probably what the Sphinx is marking. It's marking time, right? Water erosion shows it's much more ancient by far than what Egyptologists would have you believe. So it's a time marker. The Sphinx is an astronomical marker of a time in when we were having a Leo rising spring equinox in the heavens. Now, sidereal astrology is what's really happening now. It's what's really occurring in our heavens. It's not symbolic. And this is where it gets tricky, because the sidereal astrology, the real-time sky, can also be used for accurate predictions. It's just uncanny. And so can the symbolic sky. And my symbolic sky, I have a theory about that. It's not so much that we lost track of the sky. Like, 2,000 years ago, people forgot that there's precession of the equinoxes and the earth is wobbling, and that we're going to continually have different parts of the sky visible at different times, the parts of the stars visible at different times. They knew that. So why did it get stuck there? Why did they pin it to the Aries 0 point? Well, first of all, it's a symbolic sky to do with light and dark. So if you want to go Star Wars, we're talking about the movement of light in the northern hemisphere in terms of the increase of the light and the darkening of the light, right? Winter and summer. And the most light, right? The most light in the solstice and the least light in the winter solstice and the summer solstice. So it's a cosmological spiritual framework for understanding reality. But because it's a simulation, if you ask me, you put any template down for everyone to agree on, right? We're all going to agree that Newton's theory of, Newton had the full physics ideas, and now we got quantum theory. So we all agree that's working until we all find another paradigm by which to parse reality and make it useful. Right? Newtonian physics are useful still. Quantum physics is useful now. So you can actually predict stories that will happen through the sky that's symbolic, but it's a layer up. It's sort of like it's a layer up above the stratospheres, above the real-time sky. And I think it works at a different level, but it works at as if we had some more spiritual agency, more control, more interface to affect reality than the sidereal. The sidereal is hardcore fate and destiny. I'm telling you, that's why the Indian people use it for wedding predictions, like when to get married or who to get married to. Because I think it's like a really bones and structure of what must happen. But I think there's something more fluid and more ethereal and more co-creative with the zodiac that's a symbolic one. That's my theory. Now, I had to get that out of the way because you asked me a question about the aliens or the UFO stuff. There's a cycle that happens when Pluto and Neptune come together. And it began in the late 1800s with the conjunction, 1860 something maybe. And that led to the airship sightings.
That's kind of near the Carrington incident, right? That was like 1859 or something.
Oh, yeah. It was after that, I think the conjunction was perfected. But yes. Yeah, that's a good call. But that conjunction is about what's hidden, and Neptune is like the fog of what you can't quite see. It's mystical, it's interdimensional, you could say. And Pluto is what is also deeply hidden. Pluto had a cloaking device. The god Pluto in mythology had a cloaking device to make himself invisible. And he ruled the invisible other world, not the underworld. It was actually the other world. And so the mystical other realms are those two planets. And they came together. And we had a huge wave in the late 1800s, 1870s, I think it was, 1860s, 70s, 80s, of airship sightings. 1880s.
1897 was the...
Yeah. Well, there was almost a 20-year wave. And they, made all the headlines because it's like, what the hell are these things? And then people were drawing them for the newspapers, and they were cited worldwide, multiple mass sightings. Everyone saw the same thing. So you're going to love this, because then, in the 1950s, late 40s, 1950s, the two planets came together in called a sextile. And that became Project Blue Book and the fallout from the Roswell incident with the balloon, not a weather balloon, all of that stuff. And then
there were mass sightings in 1952, 1953.
Oh, yeah. And it was the flying saucer era, right? And it was all capturing the imagination. And movies started to come out about flying saucers and aliens and stuff, And then we had the next wave, and that corresponded to the 80s, 90s. So Gulf Breeze incidents were in the early 80s, and then the UFOs, Gulf Breeze sightings, but also the abduction stories. So as we approached the late 80s into early 90s, we began to have the stories like Whitley Strieber's Communion. We begin to have more coverage of abduction stuff. There was that one guy who might have covered the Betty and Barney guy that got abducted. I can't remember their names. And then there was also John Mack of Harvard University creating his book Abduction based on I was one of his people, and I'll explain that another time or whatever. People who'd experienced not interactions with non-human intelligences, whether he called them experiencers, not abductees. And that wave was correspondent to the next astrological time, right? What these two planets were in a sextile, Pluto and Neptune, and we're in it again. And it started to be felt by us in 2024. Now it's more peaking out in 25, 26, and it's waning in 27. And we're back again with all of those unknown objects that we're seeing over the eastern seaboard, actually worldwide, plasma orbs, but also drones. And that is literally coming on the heels of the next wave. And we're not even nearly at the peak. 26 is the real peak. Right now, we're almost like foretasting this energy, peaking into 26. There's more disclosure coming. Every time the asteroid Urania, which is about astronomy and astrology, crosses the ascendant of the United States every 7 years, it's always disclosures. It goes with the Tic Tac disclosures. It goes with what's the latest guy that was doing a bunch of disclosures. All the names escape me. Disclosures and revelations and secrets revealed from usually military come through when Urania, the asteroid of outer space, goes over the ascendant of the United States. And as Urania went over the ascendant last time, it was during all of those drones that were being sighted as well. So there's all these cycles every 7 years. This Urania story picks up. You have Urania conjunct your Saturn, by the way, when you were born, and everyone born within a month of you may have had that same condition, maybe 3 weeks of your birth time. But it's funny because now that we know your rising sign, that's your house of publications. So if you were writing science fiction, for example, and you want to do well, that would give you anything to do with outer space, aliens, the vast area of what we don't know beyond our planet can be successful for you. But yeah, so life is about cycles, and I'm excited to be alive because I dreamt about this as a child. I had this weird dream that kept repeating, and it was like visionary, and it came with sound effects. And I could hear this humming sound like I was in Space Odyssey and we're going through space, and it's like, ooh, like there's a humming sound, and there are a fleet of ships approaching the Earth. And I knew at some point in this life, I'd still be here for that. So I'm 63, so I've been waiting a long time, right?
So you think that portends to open contact, potentially?
Well, if you think about the progression from airship sightings to cover-ups and Roswell and Project Blue Book trying to, fake investigate the situation, and then you move to disclosures around human interfaces with non-human intelligences, 80s, 90s, what could be the next thing? Like, what would be the logical next step? What do you think?
Open contact, hopefully.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, we're like way over. So any final words for the audience? Because I want to get into all the stuff that you kind of teased at. So use astrology as a permission granted to agree to a life that is very fated. When you learn your astrology, you're going to be gobsmacked because a good astrologer will show you how everything that you've chosen, all the predilections you have, and the way this guy operates, you don't have to stress so much about life. I think astrology can be useful for I call it timing your best life. I don't want to move against the wind. Why would I do that? Why would I swim upstream when I could go down the current and ride my way through it? So I think it can be very helpful to say to people, there's something unfolding. You're a part of it. You have some creative agency within it. But also a lot of it is outside of your storyline of I have all the control, and it's kind of like that old song, Jesus Take the Wheel by Carrie Underwood, the country singer. It's like there's something bigger than you that you're being, engaged to participate in. And so I think astrology can let us relieve ourselves of the idea that we have power and control and that things happen are because we're making mistakes. You know what I mean? There's a lot of on my shoulders, everything that went wrong with my marriage. No, your marriage wasn't going to make it. I told you that. I saw it in the sky. The astrological sequence is there. It's time for that thing to die on the vine. Take it off your shoulders. It's not your fault. So astrology can be very liberating because it allows us to be more like I'm in a movie and this is the story
this is my screenplay, this is my movie, this is the character I've chosen to play, and someone else wrote a lot of the script, right? And just like an actor.
Yeah, the movie's already done, but you haven't seen it yet, so you're just.
Oh yes, exactly. Like a reel, like when you look at the old reels for movies, right, that spin out like through a projector. Like, well, they probably still use them, but the projector reel, everything is all contained in one instant. It's there, the whole story, beginning, middle, and end. You're only. Time makes us confused. We experience it as sequential frames. Yes.
All right. Well, this was absolutely fascinating, and I'm very eager to get into the next topic as well, because
alrighty,
he teased a lot of the good stuff. So, thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.